The United States spends more on its military than the next 10 countries combined. It has maintained warships, diplomatic missions, and development agencies across the Caribbean for over a century. And yet, over the past 15 years, it has steadily lost influence over a 300-kilometer island sitting less than 90 minutes by air from Miami. This is not a hypothetical. Chinese state-linked firms have built highways across Jamaica that Jamaicans use every day. Chinese financing underwrote port upgrades at one of the largest natural harbors in the Western Hemisphere. And the political relationships that accompany those investments have deepened year by year, while American engagement in the infrastructure space remained largely absent. Understanding how this happened requires understanding what Jamaica is and what it has always been. Jamaica is not a country that has drifted passively through its modern history. It negotiated independence from Britain in 1962 without armed conflict. Its diplomats contributed to the founding principles of the Non-Aligned Movement, the coalition of nations that refused alignment with either Washington or Moscow during the Cold War. At each significant moment in its post-independence history, Jamaica has attempted to calculate its external relationships on its own terms within the constraints available to it. For most of the 20th century, those constraints were defined by one structural reality. The United States was not simply a neighboring country. It was Jamaica's primary export market, significant source of credit, a tourism origin, and, when necessary, a source of political pressure. Washington did not require military presence in Kingston to shape Jamaican policy. The architecture of economic dependency performed that function. The 2008 global financial crisis destabilized that architecture. Tourism revenues contracted sharply. Remittance flows from Jamaicans working in the United States and the United Kingdom declined as those workers lost employment. The International Monetary Fund, whose operational framework reflects Washington's institutional preferences, extended credit to Jamaica under conditions that required sustained compression of public expenditure. The consequence was a contraction in government-financed capital investment that lasted the better part of a decade. Infrastructure projects that had been deferred were deferred further. Port capacity that required expansion remained at existing levels. The gap between Jamaica's infrastructure needs and its infrastructure stock widened. China's position in 2008 was materially different. Its foreign currency reserves were approaching $2 trillion. Its state-owned construction enterprises had developed significant technical capacity and cost efficiency, and its government was developing a strategic investment doctrine, what became formally known as the Belt and Road Initiative, that was oriented toward exactly the kind of opportunity Jamaica represented, a country with genuine strategic geography, significant infrastructure needs, and limited access to affordable long-term financing. Jamaica sits at the intersection of the Atlantic and the Caribbean south of the shipping lanes connecting the Panama Canal to the eastern seaboard of the United States. That location is commercially and strategically significant. China identified it as such and acted on that identification. The most significant early Chinese infrastructure investment in Jamaica was the North-South Highway, formerly the Jamaica North-South Highway Improvement Project. The highway connected Kingston on the southern coast to Ocho Rios on the north, a corridor that had previously required navigating mountain roads through the Blue Mountain interior. That journey could take 2 hours or more. The highway reduced it to under an hour. For businesses moving goods between Kingston's port and the tourism and commercial zones on the north coast, this was a material change in operating conditions. Delivery times shortened. Distribution costs fell. Connections that had been commercially marginal became viable. The contractor was China Harbour Engineering Company, known as CHEC, a subsidiary of China Communications Construction Company, one of the largest state-linked infrastructure conglomerates in the world. CHEC had operational history in the Caribbean before the North-South Highway, and Jamaica became one of its most significant bases of operation in the region. The financing came primarily from the Export-Import Bank of China through concessional loans. Credit extended at interest rates below commercial market levels. These were not grants or development assistance. They were loan obligations that Jamaica's government, already carrying a substantial debt burden, took on in addition to existing commitments. The term debt trap diplomacy circulates widely in academic and policy discussions of Chinese infrastructure finance. The argument is that loan terms are structured in ways that create repayment difficulty, generating leverage that can be exercised through debt renegotiation, preferential access arrangements, or political pressure in multilateral settings. The evidence from Jamaica does not at this point support the most extreme version of that argument. Jamaica has not transferred any assets to Chinese creditors. The infrastructure delivered under Chinese-financed contracts has generated measurable economic returns. The North-South Highway is a functional piece of public infrastructure. The port upgrades are operational. At the same time, the terms of specific financing agreements, the collateral provisions, the arbitration clauses, the conditions attached to individual contracts, have not been subject to systematic public scrutiny in Jamaica. The debate about whether Chinese infrastructure finance in Jamaica is a net benefit or a long-term liability cannot be resolved with the information currently available in the public domain. Kingston Harbour is, by standard measurements, among the 7 largest natural harbors in the world. Its depth accommodates some of the largest container vessels in operation. The Kingston Container functions as a transshipment hub for the broader Caribbean region. Cargo from South America, Europe, and West Africa arrives at Kingston, is sorted and transferred to smaller vessels, and is distributed across the region. Chinese involvement in the upgrading and expansion of this terminal capacity carries implications that extend beyond Jamaica's domestic economy. A Chinese-linked operator or financier with a significant position at Kingston gains operational visibility into cargo movements across the Caribbean basin. In the current environment, where the distinction between commercial logistics infrastructure and strategic information access is actively contested in policy circles, that visibility has value beyond its commercial dimensions. American security planning has taken note of this. When U.S. officials raise concerns about Chinese investment in Caribbean port infrastructure, they are addressing questions about access and strategic positioning, not only commercial competition. China has also been involved in other projects at a smaller scale, including works associated with the National Stadium at Independence Park, and in community-level projects that are less visible internationally but shape how Chinese engagement is perceived domestically. Public opinion surveys in Jamaica have over several years recorded broadly favorable assessments of China's role. The basis for those assessments is, in significant part, the visible presence of completed infrastructure. The United States was largely absent from Jamaica's infrastructure investment space during the period when China was most active. That absence was not accidental. It reflects the evolution of American foreign policy instruments over 3 decades. American influence in the post-World War II period rested on a combination of direct state investment, exemplified by the Marshall Plan, multilateral institution building, and bilateral security arrangements. By the 1980s, American policy had shifted substantially toward market-based mechanisms. The expectation was that private capital, properly incentivized, would deliver development outcomes more efficiently than state-directed investment. Private capital does not automatically flow toward infrastructure development in small, fiscally constrained economies. Investors require sufficient return, manageable risk, and clear legal frameworks. Jamaica, through much of the late 20th century, presented risk profiles that did not attract large-scale private infrastructure investment. Its sovereign credit ratings were poor. Its fiscal position was fragile. Its regulatory environment was improving but remained uncertain. The result was that the infrastructure gap accumulated without being addressed by American-aligned capital, private or public. The U.S. government eventually established a more capable instrument for competing with Chinese infrastructure finance. The BUILD Act of 2019 created the U.S. International Development Finance Corporation, the DFC, replacing the smaller and less flexible Overseas Private Investment Corporation. The DFC was designed to operate at greater scale, take on more risk, and provide an American alternative to Belt and Road financing. The DFC has made investments in the Caribbean, energy sector projects on several islands, some digital infrastructure commitments, but the volume and pace of these commitments have not been proportionate to the competitive gap that had developed. China entered Jamaica's infrastructure market with a significant lead in relationships, completed projects, and institutional knowledge. The DFC was designed after that lead had already been established. There is a structural asymmetry that is relevant here and is not often examined directly. Chinese state-owned construction enterprises operate within an incentive structure that prioritizes strategic positioning alongside commercial return. They can price contracts competitively, mobilize rapidly, and absorb the kind of project risk that constrains private sector participation. American construction firms operate within a different structure. They answer to shareholders, manage regulatory requirements across multiple jurisdictions, and must generate returns that justify private capital commitments. Neither structure is inherently superior in all respects. But in the specific competition for infrastructure contracts in countries like Jamaica, where fiscal constraints create pricing sensitivity and speed of delivery has political significance, the Chinese structural model has produced competitive outcomes that American private capital has not matched. Over the 15 years between 2008 and the present, China built significant infrastructure in Jamaica. The United States did not. If you are finding this analysis useful, if Caribbean Journey is covering the region in a way that other channels are not, subscribe now. The channel is building toward 10,000 subscribers. That milestone matters for what we can continue to produce. The subscribe button is there. Use it. Jamaica is not a passive actor in this situation. That characterization understates the deliberate quality of its external positioning. Prime Minister Andrew Holness and his government have pursued a strategy of parallel engagement. With China, that has meant formal participation in the Belt and Road Initiative, continued engagement with Czech on infrastructure projects, and access to Chinese concessional financing. With the United States, it has meant maintained participation in American-led security frameworks, continued market access relationships, and public affirmations of Jamaica's commitment to its traditional multilateral alignments. Maintaining both relationships simultaneously requires careful management. Accepting Chinese financing for a major port project is a different kind of commitment than endorsing Beijing's position on Taiwan or supporting China in a contested vote at the United Nations. Jamaica has taken the financing while maintaining its formal positions on the issues where Washington is most sensitive. Critics of this approach within Jamaica and in the international policy community raise a legitimate concern. The accumulation of financial obligations to Chinese state institutions, even if individually manageable, may over time constrain a future government's policy options in ways that are not apparent at the point when each obligation was incurred. Provisions in financing agreements that seem administrative at signing can become consequential when circumstances change. The counter-argument is pragmatic. Jamaica's infrastructure needs were real. The financing to address them was not available from American or multilateral sources on terms Jamaica could access. A government facing that situation has an obligation to its population that takes priority over concerns about the geopolitical preferences of external actors. Jamaica's own development agenda is relevant to this analysis. The government has articulated a long-term economic positioning centered on making Kingston a significant logistics hub, not only a transshipment relay point but a full-service maritime and air freight center capable of generating sustained, high-quality employment and economic activity. Kingston's harbor characteristics make that ambition geographically plausible. Achieving it requires the port infrastructure, highway connectivity and airport capacity that Chinese finance projects have partially delivered. From this perspective, Jamaica's engagement with Chinese infrastructure finance is not simply a response to external pressure. It reflects a Jamaican economic ambition that requires capital, and a decision to access available capital in pursuit of that ambition. The sustainability of the terms on which that capital has been accessed is a legitimate and unresolved question. The existence of the ambition itself is not in doubt. The Walton-Morant Basin, located off Jamaica's southern and eastern coastline, has been the subject of geological investigation for several years. Surveys conducted in the basin identified characteristics consistent with a prospective hydrocarbon system. Geological conditions that suggest oil or natural gas may be present in the sedimentary formations beneath the seabed. In 2025, piston core sampling was conducted in the basin. This technique extracts cylindrical sediment samples from the ocean floor. Analysis of those samples can identify the chemical signatures of subsurface hydrocarbon systems. The results, reported in 2026, confirm the presence of thermogenic hydrocarbons in the basin. Thermogenic hydrocarbons are formed through heat and pressure applied to organic material over geological time. the same process that produces commercial oil and natural gas deposits. This confirmation is significant but preliminary. It does not establish that commercially viable reserves exist in the basin. Before any development decision could be made, additional investigation would be required. Three-dimensional seismic surveys to map the subsurface structure, exploratory drilling to test specific targets, and reservoir analysis to assess flow rates and recoverable volumes. The time between promising geological indicators and first commercial production is typically measured in years, sometimes in decades. United Oil and Gas, a company with British origins and operations in the Caribbean, holds exploration rights in the Walton-Morant Basin and was involved in commissioning and conducting the 2025 sampling program. The Petroleum Corporation of Jamaica has exercised regulatory oversight of the process. The minister with portfolio responsibility for energy and natural resources during this period has been Darrell Vaz, whose involvement in related license decisions has been a subject of public discussion in Jamaica. If the Walton-Morant Basin proves to contain commercially viable hydrocarbons, the geopolitical dimensions of Jamaica's external relationships change substantially. A Jamaica with significant offshore oil production capacity is a different negotiating partner for both Washington and Beijing than a Jamaica dependent on tourism, remittances, and manufacturing. The United States has direct strategic interests in Caribbean energy development. American oil majors have the technical capacity and financial resources to participate in offshore development. American strategic preference would strongly favor frameworks that limit or exclude Chinese participation in any Jamaican hydrocarbon development. China imports oil at scale and has made energy security a central organizing principle of its global investment strategy. Its existing presence in Jamaica, the infrastructure relationships, the financial ties, the political engagement accumulated over more than a decade, represents assets it would seek to leverage in accessing any Jamaican oil development opportunity. Guyana's experience since confirming significant offshore reserves in 2015 is the most relevant regional comparison. Within a decade of that confirmation, Guyana became one of the fastest-growing economies in the world by measured output. It also acquired the governance challenges that accompany rapid resource sector expansion. Revenue management, contract transparency, environmental oversight, and the political pressures generated by large-scale external investment. Jamaica's institutional quality has improved over recent years by standard governance metrics. Whether those improvements are sufficient to manage a resource development process of the scale that commercial offshore oil production would entail is an open question. The external pressure that would accompany that process, from the United States, from China, from energy companies, from international financial institutions, would be qualitatively more intense than anything Jamaica currently manages. The offshore hydrocarbon question is, in this sense, an extension of the China-US competition in Jamaica, not a separate matter. In 2018, Jamaica received an invitation to attend a BRICS assembly. The BRICS grouping at that time comprised Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. Since then, the coalition has expanded to include Egypt, Ethiopia, the United Arab Emirates, and other states, with additional countries at various stages of engagement. BRICS has evolved beyond its origins as an informal discussion forum among large emerging economies. It is increasingly functioning as a vehicle for developing alternative institutional arrangements in global economic governance that reduce the dependence on the US dollar in international trade settlements, create financing mechanisms outside the Bretton Woods framework, and provide political cover for economic relationships that do not require alignment with American foreign policy positions. Jamaica's 2018 invitation indicated that members of the BRICS coalition regarded the Caribbean as a region of strategic interest, and Jamaica as a potential participant in the alternative institutional framework being developed. Jamaica's formal response was to maintain its existing multilateral commitments while expanding its bilateral economic relationships, a position consistent with the parallel engagement strategy it has pursued with China and the United States. Jamaica has not indicated any intention to seek formal BRICS membership, but the existence of BRICS as an institutional alternative affects the dynamics of Jamaica's negotiations with both Washington and Beijing. A country that could credibly deepen its alignment with an alternative economic bloc has more negotiating leverage than one whose only options are the existing bilateral relationships. Small states in international politics derive leverage from geography, from their vote in multilateral bodies, and from their ability to credibly signal the possibility of deepening relationships with competing external actors. Jamaica has demonstrated increasing sophistication in using these instruments over the past decade. China's central role within BRICS, its financial weight, its institutional influence, and its strategic agenda means that the BRICS dimension and the bilateral China-Jamaica relationship are not entirely separate. They are part of the same broader shift in global economic governance that is creating more complex choices for small states throughout the developing world. The range of plausible outcomes from the current situation can be organized around three trajectories. None of them is inevitable. Each is dependent on decisions that have not yet been made and on developments, including the outcome of the offshore hydrocarbon program, whose results are not yet known. The first trajectory is substantive American re-engagement. There are indicators of increased American attention to Caribbean strategic positioning. The DFC has expanded its activity. The Partnership for Global Infrastructure and Investment, the American government's stated alternative to the Belt and Road Initiative, has expressed interest in Caribbean projects. Both the Biden and Trump administrations, despite significant differences in other areas of foreign policy, have indicated sensitivity to Chinese positioning in the Western Hemisphere. The variable is whether this attention translates into concrete infrastructure delivery at a scale and pace capable of competing with China's established position. The American institutional architecture for state-directed infrastructure finance remains less developed than its Chinese counterpart. Closing that gap takes time. The second trajectory is continued Chinese consolidation. If American re-engagement does not materialize at sufficient scale, and if no alternative source of infrastructure financing enters the Jamaican market, the value of China's existing position increases over time. Completed infrastructure appreciates as it integrates into the economic fabric of the country. Relationships deepen as projects are managed and new ones are proposed. If the offshore basin moves toward commercial development, Chinese energy companies, Sinopec and Sinopec among them, are positioned to seek participation, leveraging the political relationships already established. Excluding Chinese participation in oil development would require an explicit Jamaican policy decision, likely adopted under significant American pressure and with implications for other dimensions of the bilateral relationship. The third trajectory is sustained Jamaican navigation. Jamaica continues to manage parallel relationships with competing external powers, extracting economic benefit from Chinese infrastructure financing, while avoiding formal strategic alignment with Beijing, maintaining American security relationships while leveraging Chinese alternatives to extract better terms, and managing offshore oil development through a framework that balances international capital access with Jamaican state participation in revenues. This trajectory has historical precedents. Botswana managed its diamond resources through selective partnership arrangements and disciplined governance. Trinidad and Tobago built a petrochemical sector while maintaining policy independence from its energy partners. Several Gulf states substantially revised the terms of their relationships with Western energy companies over a period of 2 decades. Whether Jamaica has the institutional capacity and political continuity to execute a comparable navigation over the time frame that the current situation requires is the central empirical question. The improvements in governance quality that Jamaica has achieved are real. Their sufficiency for this task has not been demonstrated. The dynamics described in this documentary are not specific to Jamaica. Equivalent processes are underway across the Caribbean at different speeds and in different configurations. Guyana is managing the revenue and governance consequences of confirmed large-scale offshore oil production while navigating the competing interests of American and Chinese actors. Trinidad and Tobago is managing the energy transition while maintaining external relationships with multiple competing powers. The Eastern Caribbean states have received Chinese infrastructure investment at per capita levels that are, in some cases, proportionally larger than Jamaica's. Barbados, under Prime Minister Mia Mottley, has become one of the most prominent advocates for reforming the international financial architecture to give small island states more equitable access to development capital. The Caribbean is a region with genuine strategic value. geographic position, natural resources, maritime access, and institutional weight in multilateral bodies. The competition for influence in the region is real and is conducted by states that understand this value clearly. For members of the Caribbean diaspora in the United States, the United Kingdom, and Canada, this situation has specific implications. Remittances from the diaspora are a major component of Jamaica's foreign exchange earnings, consistently among the largest external capital inflows the country receives. The economic activity of diaspora communities in host countries generates political weight in those countries, weight that is not always exercised in relation to Caribbean policy, but that exists as a potential resource. The political voice of Caribbean diaspora communities in the United States, the United Kingdom, and Canada can influence how governments in those countries frame and prioritize their engagement with the Caribbean. That influence is underutilized relative to its potential. The question of what kind of Caribbean emerges from this period, whether external investment has been used to build durable sovereign capacity, or whether accumulated financial obligations constrain the options of future governments, will be determined in significant part by the quality of governance in Caribbean states and by the degree to which Caribbean populations, including diaspora populations, hold their governments accountable for the terms on which external engagement is accepted. American influence in Jamaica has declined over the past 15 years. That decline is measurable in infrastructure built, financing extended, and relationships established by a competing power during a period when American engagement was structurally limited. The decline is not irreversible. The United States retains significant structural advantages in Jamaica: cultural ties of long-standing market access relationships, immigration pathways, and security cooperation arrangements that are not dissolved by highway construction. The density of connections between the Jamaican diaspora in the United States and communities in Jamaica remains among the highest in the Caribbean. What has changed is the competitive position. Jamaica now has substantive economic relationships with both the United States and China, and has used the existence of each to manage the terms of its engagement with the other. It is no longer simply within the American sphere of influence in any unqualified sense. It is a small state with real leverage over two major powers, each of which needs to maintain its engagement with Jamaica to protect its broader regional interests. Whether Jamaica can sustain and develop that leverage in a way that produces outcomes beneficial to its population depends on governance quality, institutional continuity, and the decisions made about offshore resource development over the next several years. Whether the United States can recover the competitive position it has lost in Jamaica depends on whether it can develop and deploy infrastructure financing instruments at a scale and speed that its institutional structure does not currently support. Whether China's position consolidates into strategic influence of a more durable kind depends on whether the terms of its existing agreements are sustainable for Jamaica and on whether it can secure access to any offshore oil development that materializes. These questions do not have resolved answers. They are being worked out through decisions made in Kingston, Washington, and Beijing, and through geological results from the Walton-Morant Basin that nobody yet fully controls. If this analysis has been useful to you, subscribe to Caribbean Journey. The channel is building toward 10,000 subscribers. The goal is to cover the Caribbean with the rigor and seriousness the region merits. Before you leave, consider this question. If you were advising Jamaica's government on the terms of its next infrastructure agreement with China, what would your single non-negotiable condition be? Leave that answer in the comments. It is a question with direct policy implications, and the range of answers it generates is worth understanding. This is Caribbean Journey.